You honestly expect us to believe this? Officer Davis sneered, gesturing around the modest, slightly worn living room, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the faded rug. Is where someone receiving $500,000 in untraceable cash lives? An old man in a house that looks like it hasn't been updated since the first Bush administration. His partner, Officer Miller, chuckled, a short, dry sound devoid of humor. The air hung thick with suspicion and condescension. Elias Thorne, the man they were addressing, sat calmly on his worn armchair, his hands resting lightly on his knees. He didn't fidget, didn't raise his voice. He just looked at them with eyes that seemed too old, too deep for the surface calm. Eyes that held a history they couldn't begin to fathom. They saw a quiet, maybe slightly bewildered, older man in plain, unassuming clothes in a humble dwelling. They saw someone easy to dismiss, easy to push around. They saw everything but the truth. And that truth was about to shatter their neat, prejudiced little world. How often do we look and see only what we expect, missing the profound depth hidden beneath the surface? How often is quiet dignity mistaken for weakness? This was more than a misunderstanding. It was an indictment of judgment based on appearance. If you believe true strength and honor aren't always loud or flashy, type respect in the comments now. Sergeant Major Elias Thorne. The name itself carried weight, a silent echo of decades spent in the shadows, in the crucible of the world's most dangerous places. But here, in his small house on a quiet, tree-lined street, the name felt like a relic, disconnected from the unassuming figure who inhabited it. He wasn't retired, not technically, though his current role often felt more like a strategic ghost than a frontline operator. Decades of high-stakes missions, impossible tasks, and unparalleled dedication had earned him a rank few civilians, or even regular military, ever attained. He had seen the worst humanity had to offer and had been instrumental in preventing even greater horrors. Yet he chose to live simply. His house wasn't a statement of poverty, but of practicality, anonymity. A place to blend in, to disappear when necessary, which was often. His quiet nature wasn't shyness. It was the deeply ingrained discipline of someone whose words, when spoken, had to be precise, impactful, and often rare. His unassuming appearance was his armor, a lifetime built on the principle that the less you were seen, the more effective you could be. He was a master of blending into the background, and right now that mastery was working against him, casting him as exactly what the officers assumed him to be. Nobody important. A simple old man in a simple old house, easily overlooked, easily accused. Mr. Thorne, Officer Davis continued, his voice dripping with patronizing impatience. We have credible information that a significant amount of cash, linked to illegal activities, was delivered to this address within the last 48 hours. We need you to cooperate. Where is it? Elias met his gaze steadily. I have received no such money, officer. His voice was low, calm, without a hint of defensiveness, which only seemed to irritate the officers more. They were used to bluster, denial, or outright panic. Elias's composure felt like defiance. Officer Miller stepped closer, leaning down slightly, trying to intimidate. Look, Pops, this isn't some minor loitering charge. This is serious. $500,000. That kind of money doesn't just vanish. Someone gave it to you, or maybe you're holding it for someone. Either way, obstruction is a separate felony. I understand the gravity of your accusation, Elias replied, his tone still level. And I repeat, I have received no such funds. He didn't elaborate, didn't offer excuses or alternative explanations. His training had taught him that in hostile interrogations, every unnecessary word was a potential liability. Stick to the core truth, remain calm, and assess the threat. These officers, while clearly misguided and overbearing, weren't the kind of threat he was accustomed to, but they represented a different kind of danger, the bureaucratic, unyielding force of misinterpreted authority. Davis threw his hands up in exasperation. All right, that's it. He's obviously stonewalling. Miller, let's toss the place. We have probable cause, the credible tip, and his suspicious lack of a plausible explanation. Suspicious. Elias finally showed a flicker of something other than calm, a raised eyebrow. Not confirming a false accusation is suspicious. Your refusal to cooperate is suspicious, Davis snapped. And your refusal to explain your living situation, which clearly doesn't match the profile of someone dealing with that kind of money. What profile are you referring to, officer? Elias's voice remained quiet, but there was a subtle shift in the air, a barely perceptible hardening, like rock beneath soft sand. Do criminals only live in mansions? Do honest people only live in squalor? Miller cut in, getting aggressive. Don't play games with us. We know you're hiding something, either the money or who you're hiding it for. And we're gonna find out. He started towards a bookshelf, ready to pull books down, knock things over. Elias spoke, his voice cutting through Miller's movement. You may search. I have nothing to hide in that regard. But I advise you to proceed with caution. Not everything in this house is what it seems. Davis scoffed. Oh, spooky. What, you got booby traps? Or maybe you mean your secret stash of cash is really well hidden. He laughed again, a harsh, unpleasant sound. Don't worry, old man, we're professionals. We know how to handle a little mess. As they began to move through the small house, opening cabinets roughly, pulling drawers out, Elias watched them. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. Pity? Resignation? He made no move to stop them, simply observed their clumsy, destructive search. They weren't trained for this kind of precision, this kind of environment where every object might have a purpose beyond its mundane appearance. They were looking for stacks of cash. They wouldn't recognize encryption devices disguised as old radios or secure communication lines wired through the baseboards. They wouldn't understand the significance of the seemingly random assortment of old maps or the carefully curated library of dense, technical manuals. His warning had been genuine, not a threat, but a statement of fact they were too arrogant to grasp. The officers grew increasingly frustrated as their search yielded nothing but ordinary household items, old photographs, and worn furniture. Their initial confidence began to fray, replaced by annoyance and a growing suspicion that they might have been sent on a wild goose chase, yet unwilling to admit it. Nothing, Davis exclaimed, kicking lightly at a chair leg. There's nothing here. This tip was garbage. Maybe he already moved it, Miller suggested, his voice tight with frustration. Or maybe it's stashed outside. Did you check the shed? There's no shed, Elias said quietly from the living room. All right, fine. Davis turned back to Elias, his face red with thwarted aggression. Even if the money's gone, we still need to figure out your connection. Who are you working for? Who gave you the money? We're taking you downtown for questioning. Elias paused. Going downtown meant booking, fingerprinting, having his name run through standard databases. While his public record was clean, his classified profile was extensive. It would trigger alarms far beyond the local precinct. It would reveal everything. This had gone too far. He had hoped his simple denial would be enough, or that the fruitless search would convince them. It hadn't. Officers, Elias said, his voice gaining a new, subtle authority that made both men pause, though they didn't understand why. Before you proceed, I must insist you make one phone call to confirm my identity and status. Davis scoffed. Identity? We have your ID. Status? You're a person of interest in a major financial crime investigation. My full status, Elias corrected, his gaze unwavering. Call the Pentagon Command Center. Ask for Colonel Vance. Tell him Sergeant Major Elias Thorne requests immediate verification. A beat of stunned silence. Davis and Miller exchanged glances, a mixture of disbelief and ridicule on their faces. The Pentagon? Colonel Vance? Are you serious? Davis guffawed. You think some colonel at the Pentagon is going to drop everything because Sergeant Major whoever you are from Shady Acres wants a reference? It is not a request for a reference, Elias stated, his voice now carrying the weight of absolute certainty. It is protocol. For my protection and for yours. Call him. Miller snorted. This guy's delusional. Protocol, he says. From the Pentagon. Right. Fine, Davis said, pulling out his phone. though his expression showed he thought this was a ridiculous waste of time, probably a desperate delaying tactic. "I'll make the call, but when Colonel Vance doesn't answer or doesn't know you from Adam, you're coming with us. And you'll be facing additional charges for making false statements and hindering an investigation." He dialed the General Pentagon number, navigated the automated system, and eventually, after several minutes on hold, reached a duty officer. "Yes, I'm Officer Davis, City Police. We have a situation here with a civilian, Elias Thorne, claims he needs verification from a Colonel Vance. Says it's protocol regarding his status?" Davis rolled his eyes visibly as he spoke into the phone. There was a long pause on the other end. Davis listened, his casual posture slowly stiffening. His eyes widened slightly. He glanced at Elias, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. "Yes, I understand. Sergeant Major. Active duty. Classified. Yes, he insists on speaking to Colonel Vance personally. Right now. At this location." Another long pause. Davis's face was paling. "Understood. We'll await instruction." He hung up the phone, his hand trembling slightly. He looked at Miller, then back at Elias, who was watching him with that same quiet, intense gaze. The air in the room had changed again, the previous condescension replaced by a palpable, heavy uncertainty. "Well?" Miller prompted, sensing his partner's shift. Davis swallowed hard. That wasn't a duty officer. Not really. It was patched through." He hesitated, struggling to process what he'd just heard. They said he's active, and that Colonel Vance is being notified immediately, and that we are not to move him or take any further action until they make contact or send someone, and that our badges might not protect us if we mishandle this. The arrogance was completely gone from his voice, replaced by sheer confusion and a dawning sense of dread. Before either officer could fully process this cryptic information, the sound of sirens, not the wailing, urgent kind, but the purposeful, authoritative kind, approached rapidly and then cut off abruptly outside the house. Moments later, heavy, rapid footsteps sounded on the porch. The front door, which the officers had left slightly ajar, was pushed open. Standing in the doorway was a figure of immense authority, dressed in a crisp, dark suit, carrying himself with military precision. A man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes scanned the room. He wasn't police, but the air he radiated commanded instant respect. He took in the two flustered officers, the slightly disheveled state of the room, and finally, his eyes landed on Elias, still seated calmly in his armchair. A profound change came over the man's face. The stern authority softened slightly, replaced by an expression of deep respect and concern. He wasn't a Colonel Vance, but someone of equal or greater standing, someone clearly connected to the same world. "Sergeant Major Thorne," the man said, his voice resonating with a calm power that silenced the room. He didn't ask if it was him. He stated it as a fact, a recognition. He then did something that stunned the two police officers rigid. The man in the expensive suit, the man who radiated unquestionable power, snapped to attention and rendered a sharp, perfect salute to Elias Thorne. "Judge Thomas Thompson reporting, sir. Colonel Vance sends his apologies. He is currently off-continent on a sensitive matter but notified me immediately. He relayed your request for verification and protocol observation. I am here to ensure it. Judge Thompson, a name known and respected throughout the state, a federal judge renowned for his integrity and his deep, though often private, connections to national security matters. His presence here, saluting this unassuming man, was surreal. The officers stared, their jaws slack. Sergeant Major? Judge? Saluting? Their little bribery case had just collapsed spectacularly, taking their understanding of reality with it. Judge Thompson held the salute for a moment longer than strictly necessary, a silent acknowledgement of Elias's rank and service. Then, lowering his hand, his piercing blue eyes fixed on the two police officers. His voice, while no longer resonant with respect, was now edged with cold, controlled fury. "Officers," Judge Thompson said, his tone lethal in its quietness. Perhaps you would explain to me, slowly and clearly, precisely why you are in Sergeant Major Thorne's home, why the residence appears to have been searched, and on what authority you were attempting to detain an active duty Special Forces Sergeant Major on classified assignment. Officer Davis stammered, his face now completely white. Judge Thompson? Sir? We received a tip. About a large cash delivery. Bribery. Bribery, Judge Thompson repeated, the single word hanging in the air like a death knell. He looked at Elias, then back at the officers. You accuse Sergeant Major Elias Thorne, a man whose personal wealth, derived entirely from his meager government salary, has been meticulously vetted and is a matter of national security interest, of bribery? Sergeant Major Thorne, whose current assignment involves tracing and disrupting the financial networks of global terrorist and criminal organizations, including large cash transfers? You accuse him of receiving illicit funds. Judge Thompson shook his head slowly, a gesture of profound disappointment and anger. Sergeant Major Thorne doesn't receive $500,000 in illegal cash. He finds it, tracks it, and makes it disappear from the world's criminal balance sheets. Often personally, and with extreme prejudice. He gestured around the room again, his gaze sharp. You saw a modest house and an unassuming man and jumped to conclusions based on a flimsy, anonymous tip. Did it occur to you for 1 second to question the source? To consider who might want to make a false accusation against a man like this? A man whose work directly impacts the most dangerous people on the planet. His voice rose slightly, losing its controlled edge. This wasn't just incompetence. It was a failure of basic investigative sense compounded by egregious disrespect for a man who has given everything to this country, operating in the shadows you couldn't even begin to comprehend. The officers stood frozen, unable to speak, unable to look away from the judge's withering gaze. The reality of their mistake, the magnitude of who they had just disrespected and falsely accused, crashed down on them. They hadn't just bothered an old man. They had potentially compromised a critical operation and insulted a national treasure. Sergeant Major Thorne, Judge Thompson turned back to Elias, his voice softening once more. Are you harmed? Has anything been compromised? I am unharmed, Judge, Elias replied quietly. Nothing of consequence was disturbed. Their search was superficial. Judge Thompson nodded. Good. That is the only good news I've heard all afternoon. He turned back to the officers, his expression hardening into cold, official finality. Officers Davis and Miller, your actions here today represent a gross abuse of authority, a failure of judgment, and a potentially catastrophic security breach. I will be contacting your precinct chief immediately. I will personally ensure a full investigation is launched, not only into your conduct but into the source of this malicious and likely targeted tip. You are to vacate this residence immediately, without touching another thing. Your involvement in this matter is concluded. You will hear from Internal Affairs by the end of the day. Consider your careers complicated at best. He didn't dismiss them with a shout, but with a quiet, absolute authority that left no room for appeal. Humbled and utterly defeated, their faces pale with shock and shame, Davis and Miller mumbled incoherent apologies directly to Elias, who simply inclined his head slightly, acknowledging them but offering no absolution. They backed out of the house slowly, relief warring with terror. Judge Thompson watched them go, then closed the door softly behind them. He turned back to Elias, the stern judge persona melting away. He walked over, not as a superior officer, but as a man showing genuine reverence. Elias, he said, using his first name, a sign of their shared understanding of this hidden world. I am truly sorry you were subjected to this. It's unacceptable. They had no idea. Few do, Judge, Elias replied, finally rising from his chair, his posture straight, his movements economical, revealing the underlying strength his unassuming appearance had concealed. That's the nature of the job, I know, Thompson said. But they should have had the sense, the training to recognize. Something wasn't adding up. To make the damn call earlier, he looked around the slightly disarrayed room. Let me help you with this. It's fine, Thomas, Elias said, a faint, tired smile touching his lips. Just a little dust displaced. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Two men from different branches of service, different worlds, connected by their understanding of duty, sacrifice, and the unseen battles fought every day. The quiet dignity that had defined Elias throughout the ordeal now radiated freely, no longer needing to be a shield against judgment, but simply the presence of a man of profound honor. Judge Thompson didn't see a suspect. He saw the sergeant major, the legend whispered about in certain circles, the quiet force that kept terrible things at bay. The incident, though quickly contained and buried under layers of official discretion, sent ripples through the local police force. The rapid, decisive action taken by Judge Thompson, the quiet disappearance of officers Davis and Miller into internal investigations, served as a stark, unspoken lesson. They had judged a book by its cover and nearly brought down the wrath of a world they didn't know existed. News of the mistake spread, heavily censored, but the core truth remained. The quiet man in the modest house was someone of immense importance, someone who commanded respect far beyond any badge. Elias Thorne continued to live his life, just as before. The sun still cast shadows in his living room. His house remained unassuming. But now, when neighbors saw him, there was a subtle shift in their demeanor, an unknowing deference. And for the officers who had been there, or those who heard the hushed, incomplete accounts, the image of Judge Thompson saluting the quiet man in the armchair was burned into their minds. It was a constant, silent reminder: never judge by appearance. True strength, true service, true honor, often walks in the quietest of shoes, lives in the most humble of homes, and requires respect not demanded, but earned over a lifetime of sacrifice. The world is full of hidden heroes. Sometimes, it takes a dramatic reveal to remind us to look closer, and to treat everyone with the dignity they might secretly deserve. This story is a testament to the hidden value in people often overlooked, a reminder that true worth is not measured by appearance or status, but by character and contribution, often made in silence and sacrifice. Remember to look beyond the surface. If you believe in respecting the hidden heroes among us, those who serve and sacrifice in anonymity, make sure to subscribe to my channel. We share stories that reveal the incredible depth and resilience of the human spirit, reminding us that honor is often found where we least expect it. Subscribe now, and never miss a story that will inspire you to look for the greatness in everyone.